Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. On May 10, 1941, the deputy Führer of Nazi Germany did the unthinkable. He climbed into a fighter plane, flew completely alone to Scotland, and was captured almost immediately. He'd never be a free man again. Now, his unauthorized flight has inspired, countless biographies, movies, and wild conspiracy theories. But what about the people he left behind? What about the lifelong consequences for his family? That's exactly the 80-year fallout we're going to unpack today.
It's kind of crazy because it's a story that almost nobody talks about. Think about it. His wife, Ilse, was 40, and his little boy Wolf Rudiger, who they call Buzz, was just 3 years old when he basically just vanished. They had absolutely no clue he was leaving, and there was simply no way they could have prepared for the massive avalanche of consequences that was about to crash down on them.
Within just 48 hours of his parachute landing in Scotland, the regime back in Berlin was scrambling to do damage control. They publicly denounced him as mentally ill and completely erased his status. Ilse was just piecing things together from whispers and contradictory statements. Munich was getting hit by Allied bombing, and her husband's name was now basically radioactive, so she packed up and moved to their country house in the Alps just to lay low.
Imagine the sheer whiplash here. Just a few days prior, little Wolf Rudiger's godfather was literally Adolf Hitler. Then, basically overnight, Ilse becomes the wife of a man the state completely disowns. As far as the regime was concerned, that marriage was over. And so, the boy grew up in a country that wanted absolutely nothing to do with him or his father.
And while Hess was locked away, getting a life sentence at Nuremberg and later being transferred to Spandau prison, Ilse and her son were facing their own post-war nightmare. In 1947, Ilse was arrested along with other wives of Nuremberg defendants and thrown into an internment camp. A denazification tribunal labeled her a follower of the regime. Meanwhile, her 9-year-old son had to be hidden away with an aunt, going to school under a name that brought constant, unbearable whispers from the other kids.
28 years. That is exactly how long Rudolf Hess deliberately chose to block his own family from visiting him. After Ilse got out of the internment camp in 1948 and finally got back to her son, they desperately wanted to see him. But Hess, he held firm. Every month, inmates got 4 sheets of paper. He'd use his to write to them, sure, but he kept rejecting his visitation rights, claiming the prison conditions were simply too degrading for his wife to witness.
So, to survive those post-war years, Ilse had to adapt. She opened up a guest house in the Alps and started publishing the letters she exchanged with her husband. And she did this through a publisher that specialized in stuff from former Nazis. Because of this, her guest house didn't just attract regular tourists. It started drawing in a growing network of far-right sympathizers and old friends of the regime who wanted to talk about her husband's case.
Fast forward a bit. By 1966, the other prisoners at Spandau had been released, meaning Hess was completely alone. To put this in perspective, it cost 800,000 Deutschmarks a year to keep a 600-cell prison running for just one guy. For 46 years, he sat there, essentially becoming this incredibly expensive, highly symbolic prisoner of geopolitics.
You're probably wondering, why keep this massive, empty prison open for one aging man? Well, it all boiled down to the Cold War. By 1967, Wolf Rudiger was actively campaigning for his dad's release, and the British, French, and Americans were actually starting to show some sympathy. But Spandau was right in the western sector of Berlin, and it gave the Soviet Union a literal, physical foothold there. They had veto power, and they flat-out refused to give up that leverage for anyone.
So what actually breaks a stalemate like that? A medical crisis. In December 1969, a 75-year-old Hess was rushed to a British military hospital in West Berlin with a severely perforated ulcer. He was in agonizing pain, and finally, for the very first time since May 1941, he agreed to let his family come see him.
Can you even imagine the emotional shock of walking into that hospital room? Wolf Rudiger was now 32, an architect, a married man himself. He was meeting a father he literally only knew from old photos. Ilse was nearly 70. The disconnect had to be incredibly jarring. The man lying in that bed was a frail, elderly shadow of the powerful deputy Führer who had flown away almost 3 decades ago.
And even after they finally reunited, the relationship was heavily restricted. We're talking 30-minute conversations once a month, talking over a chest-high wooden barrier. Guards hovered nearby the entire time, and absolutely no physical contact was allowed. Wolf Rudiger's wife even had to bring little film reels to show Hess his grandchildren because the rules literally forbade the kids from visiting together. He couldn't even give them a hug.
Going through those agonizing visits really lit a fire under Wolf Rudiger. He essentially made freeing his father his life's mission. He kept up his architecture career, but this became an absolute crusade for him. He was lobbying world leaders, firing off endless letters, giving press conferences, and using every single historical anniversary to try and apply pressure. He was trying to untangle a Cold War knot that simply wouldn't budge. Even with private backing from big names like U.S. President Richard Nixon, that Soviet veto stood strong. And time just kept marching on. In 1984, Hess turned 90 behind bars. Then, on August 17, 1987, the 93-year-old was found dead in a prison garden house. An electrical cord was strung over a window latch, and he had a short thank you note to his family right in his pocket. Spandau's sole inmate was finally gone.
They eventually buried him at the family plot in Wunsiedel. The gravestone had a motto etched into it that really captured the family's completely unyielding attitude. I have dared. But the story doesn't just neatly end with a funeral. His death actually set off a bizarre and controversial new chapter.
See, instead of finding closure, Wolf Rudiger went deep down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. He completely rejected the official suicide ruling. His logic was there's no way a frail 93-year-old could manage to hang himself. He got a second autopsy, claimed the injuries looked like strangulation, and decided British intelligence must have murdered his father. He wrote books pushing this theory and accidentally turned his father's grave into an annual pilgrimage site for the organized far right.
But those conspiracies completely fell apart once we got actual data and unsealed records. In 2007, the British declassified their files, and guess what? There was zero evidence of a murder plot. And then there was this really wild fringe theory that the guy in Spandau was just a body double. Well, a 2019 DNA test absolutely destroyed that one, proving with 99.99% certainty that it was in fact Rudolf Hess. Science slammed the door shut. To deal with the extremism the grave was attracting, the German government had to step in and totally erase that physical footprint. They changed the laws to ban the marches. Then, in 2011, the local parish simply refused to renew the lease on the grave. So, at dawn, they opened it up, cremated the remains, scattered them at sea, and destroyed the gravestone. The physical presence of Rudolf Hess was literally wiped off the map.
And here is the absolute tragic irony of this whole thing. Wolf Rudiger waged a lifelong war against the very country that had secretly been his dad's best shot at freedom. He died in 2001, completely unaware of those declassified files. He spent his entire adult life, his career, his energy, everything, fighting the British, never knowing they had actually been working behind the scenes to try and get his father released.
It leaves us with a pretty heavy question. How do you even process spending your entire life battling for a narrative that history and science ultimately prove was just an illusion? The story of Ilse and Wolf Rudiger Hess is this intense, complex look at collateral damage and the unbelievable lengths a family will go to protect a legacy, even when it's built entirely on sand. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history behind the headlines.